The distant wail of a train whistle pierced the still night air as Cade Kavanagh trudged wearily across his property, lantern swinging in rhythm with his boot steps. Sacramento, 1875, a place of promise and peril, where a man's land was his kingdom, but the crown often weighed heavy. Tonight, it was the weight of exhaustion that bore down on him after a long day of mending fences and herding cattle on his modest ranch, just outside the bustling California town. A sudden gust of autumn wind extinguished his lantern, leaving only the silver light of the moon to guide his path toward the barn. Cursing under his breath, Cade quickened his pace, eager to check on his prized mare before turning in for the night. The large wooden structure loomed ahead, a darker shadow against the night sky. As he approached, something seemed different. The door hung slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered securing it before heading out that morning. His calloused hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he pushed the door open wider, wincing at the loud creak of hinges that needed oiling. "Who's there?" he called out, his deep voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Show yourself." The only answer was the soft nickering of horses and the rustle of hay. Cade struck a match and relit his lantern, raising it high to cast light into the corners of the barn. Nothing seemed out of place. His tools hung on the wall. The horses stood calm in their stalls. The hay bales were stacked neatly against the far wall. The hay bales. Something caught his eye, a flash of fabric, perhaps, or the slightest movement that didn't belong among the golden straw. Cautiously he approached, keeping his free hand near his gun. "I see you there. Come on out now," he commanded, his voice firm but not threatening. A small gasp escaped from behind the stack, followed by a woman's voice trembling with fear. "Please, please don't hurt me." Cade's brow furrowed as he moved closer, lantern extended. What he saw made him freeze in his tracks. Huddled against the hay was a young woman, her face smudged with dirt and tear tracks, one hand protectively cradling the unmistakable swell of her pregnant belly beneath a tattered dress. Her eyes, wide with fear, reflected the lantern light like two blue pools. "Madam," he said, immediately lowering his gun and setting the lantern down. "I'm not going to harm you." Her breathing was rapid, panicked. "They'll find me," she whispered, eyes darting toward the barn door. "They're looking for me." Cade didn't need to ask who they were. Not immediately. The terror in her voice told him enough. Acting on instinct, he shrugged off his heavy wool coat and gently placed it around her shoulders. She flinched at his approach but accepted the warmth, pulling it tighter around herself. "I'm Cade Kavanagh. This is my ranch," he said softly, crouching down to her level but keeping a respectful distance. "You're safe here." "Bethany," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Bethany Ellis." Her voice cracked with emotion and exhaustion. Cade nodded, noticing how she shivered despite the coat. "How long have you been in my barn, Miss Ellis?" "Since this afternoon," she admitted. "I didn't know where else to go." Her hand moved protectively over her belly again. "I'm sorry for trespassing." "Don't worry about that now," Cade replied, his mind racing with questions but knowing this wasn't the time to press. "When's the baby due?" 2 months, maybe less," she said, wincing slightly as she shifted position. "I've lost track of the days." Cade glanced toward the barn door, considering his options. The proper thing would be to take her to his house, offer her a bed, but if someone was indeed looking for her. "Miss Ellis, Bethany, I think you should tell me who's after you," he said gently. "I can't help if I don't know what we're facing." Her eyes welled with tears. "My husband's family," she said, her voice barely audible. "I ran away. After he died, they wanted to take the baby, said a widow couldn't raise a child properly." She looked up at him, desperation clear in her expression. "This baby is all I have left of him." Cade felt a surge of anger at the nameless family who would threaten a pregnant widow. "No one's taking your baby," he said firmly. "Not on my land." He made a decision then, rising to his feet. "Stay here. I'll secure the barn and keep watch tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure something more permanent." Bethany's relief was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. Cade busied himself gathering more hay to create a more comfortable bed for her, then retrieved a blanket from his saddle gear to place over his coat. He brought her water and some jerky from his saddlebag, not much of a meal, but better than nothing. "Try to rest," he advised, moving toward the barn door to secure it properly. "I'll be right here." As he settled himself on an upturned crate with a clear view of both the barn door and the pregnant stranger in the hay, Cade Kavanagh wondered what twist of fate had brought Bethany Ellis to his barn on this particular night. Whatever trouble followed her, he had already decided one thing: he would protect her and her unborn child, no matter what came next. The night passed slowly as Cade kept his vigil. Every distant sound, a coyote's howl, the whisper of wind through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl caused him to tense, hand moving instinctively to his revolver. But no intruders came, and eventually the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the barn walls. He glanced over at Bethany, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, his coat and the blanket pulled tightly around her. In the gentle morning light, he could see her more clearly, her chestnut hair falling in tangled waves around her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes speaking of long days without proper rest. She couldn't be much older than 20, he guessed, far too young to be widowed and on the run with a child on the way. Cade stood, stretching his stiff muscles after the long night of sitting watch. He needed to check on his cattle and tend to the horses, but he was reluctant to leave her alone. As if sensing his gaze, Bethany stirred, her eyes fluttering open in momentary confusion before recognition, and then wariness settled in her expression. "Morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" She pushed herself up with some difficulty, one hand on her lower back. "I've been better," she admitted, trying for a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But I'm grateful for the shelter." "You're welcome to it," Cade replied, reaching for a canteen of fresh water. "But I think we need to move you to the house. It's not proper or comfortable for you to stay in the barn, especially in your condition." Fear flashed across her face. "If they come looking, my house is set back from the road," he assured her. "And I don't get many visitors out this way. You'll be safer there and I can keep better watch." Bethany hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Cade said firmly. "Now let me help you up." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation she took it, allowing him to gently lift her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow, careful not to overstep propriety despite the unusual circumstances. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked, noting how thin her wrists were despite her pregnant belly. She looked away, embarrassed. "I've had some bread and cheese. 2 days ago, I think." Cade frowned. "Then breakfast is the first order of business. Can you walk to the house or shall I bring the wagon around?" "I can walk," she said with quiet determination. "I've come this far on my feet." He nodded, respecting her resolve while remaining close as they exited the barn. The morning air was crisp, the dew still clinging to the tall grass that surrounded the weathered 2-story farmhouse about 100 yards away. Cade's ranch wasn't the largest in the Sacramento Valley, but the 50 acres he'd built up over the last 5 years provided a good living. The house itself had been there when he purchased the land, and while he'd made improvements, it remained a bachelor's home, functional rather than comfortable. As they approached, Cade suddenly saw his home through a stranger's eyes: the peeling paint on the porch railings, the the stack of firewood haphazardly piled by the door, the single chair on the porch where he sometimes sat to watch the sunset. Not much to look at, but it was his. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically as he opened the front door for her, "but it's dry and warm." Bethany stepped inside, still wrapped in his coat despite the warming day. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a rough-hewn table and chairs, a stone fireplace, and a few shelves of books, one of Cade's few indulgences. A narrow staircase led to the second floor where two small bedrooms were located. "It's lovely," she said softly, and though he suspected she was being kind, there was genuine relief in her voice to be inside a real home. "Sit," he instructed, pulling out a chair at the table. "I'll start breakfast." He moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the cast-iron stove, setting a pot of coffee to boil, and mixing batter for cornbread. From his pantry, he retrieved bacon and eggs, grateful that he'd recently gone into town for supplies. As he worked, he could feel Bethany watching him, and occasionally he glanced her way, offering a reassuring smile. She had removed his coat, but sat with her hands folded protectively over her belly, her eyes constantly darting to the windows as if expecting to see unfriendly faces peering in. "No one knows you're here," he reminded her gently, "and even if they come looking, they'll have to deal with me first." "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me. I could be anyone, telling you any story." Cade paused in his cooking, considering the question. "My mother taught me never to turn away someone in need," he said finally. "She'd have my hide if I'd left a pregnant woman to fend for herself in my barn." He smiled slightly at the memory of his strong-willed mother, gone these past 8 years. "Besides, I'm a decent judge of character." "I believe you're telling the truth." Bethany lowered her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not everyone would be so kind." "Kindness isn't so rare out here as people think," he replied, turning back to the stove. "We all need help sometimes." The silence that followed was more comfortable as Cade finished preparing the meal, filling 2 plates with eggs, bacon, and hot cornbread with butter and honey. He set one before Bethany along with a steaming cup of coffee, then took the seat across from her. She stared at the food for a moment, as if overwhelmed, before picking up her fork with a slightly trembling hand. The first bite seemed to break a dam, and she began to eat with the controlled desperation of someone who had been hungry for too long, but was trying to maintain dignity. Cade pretended not to notice, focusing on his own plate and giving her the privacy to eat. Only when she had slowed down did he speak again. "When you're ready," he said carefully, "I'd like to know more about who might be looking for you. If I'm to help, I need to understand what we're facing." Bethany set down her fork, her plate now empty. For a long moment she was silent, as if gathering her courage. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady. "My husband was Benjamin Ellis. His family owns Ellis Shipping in San Francisco. They're wealthy, influential. I was a governess for his younger sister when we met." She paused, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Ben wasn't like the rest of them. He was kind, idealistic. We married against his family's wishes. They thought I was after their money, that I wasn't good enough for their son." She took a sip of coffee before continuing. "We were happy, though. Ben started his own business separate from his family. We had a small house in Sacramento, and then I got with child, and Ben was so excited." Her voice caught. "3 months ago, there was an accident at the docks. Ben was killed instantly." Cade's heart ached for her. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. Bethany nodded, acknowledging his sympathy. "His parents came for the funeral. That's when everything changed. They said I couldn't possibly provide for a child on my own, that the baby, their grandchild, deserved to be raised with advantages I couldn't give. At first, They offered money if I would give them the baby after birth. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. When I refused, they became insistent, said they'd take the child legally, that no court would side with a penniless widow over a prominent family. Then I found out they'd hired a lawyer to declare me an unfit mother before the baby was even born. Her blue eyes lifted to meet his, fierce despite her exhaustion. So I ran. I've been moving from town to town for the last month, but I think they've been tracking me. I saw one of their hired men in town yesterday, asking questions. That's when I followed the road out of Sacramento and found your barn. Cade absorbed her story, understanding now the depth of her fear. The Ellis family was indeed influential. He'd heard of them even out here. They would have resources, connections, perhaps even law enforcement willing to look the other way for the right price. They can't just take your child, he said firmly. That's not how the law works. The law works differently for the rich, Bethany replied bitterly. And I have no proof of their threats, just my word against theirs. Cade couldn't argue with that truth. He'd seen enough in his 30 years to know that justice wasn't always blind, especially when gold was involved. Well, he said decisively, they won't find you here. You can stay as long as you need to until the baby comes and after if necessary. Surprise and caution warred in Bethany's expression. You barely know me, she protested. I can't impose on you like that. It's not an imposition if it's offered freely, Cade replied. And I have the space. The second bedroom hasn't been used since my brother visited last Christmas. He stood, gathering their empty plates. You need rest and safety, especially now. My ranch can provide both. He could see she wanted to argue further but was too exhausted and relieved to put up much fight. At least let me earn my keep, she said finally. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not helpless, despite appearances. Cade smiled. I won't turn down help with the cooking. Been eating my own fare too long. He gestured toward the stairs. Why don't you get some rest? The bedroom on the right is yours. There's water for washing in the pitcher, and I'll find you some clean clothes. Bethany rose somewhat awkwardly due to her condition. Thank you, Mr. Kavanagh. Truly, Cade, he corrected gently. Just Cade. She nodded, a faint blush coloring her pale cheeks. Cade then, and I'm Bethany. With that, she made her way up the stairs, moving slowly but with the same quiet determination he'd observed earlier. When she had disappeared into the bedroom, Cade let out a long breath, running a hand through his dark hair. He just invited a pregnant stranger to live in his home indefinitely, potentially putting himself between her and a powerful family bent on taking her child. It wasn't the most prudent decision he'd ever made, but watching her climb those stairs, shoulders straight despite everything she'd endured, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Something about Bethany Ellis stirred protective instincts he hadn't known were so strong. Perhaps it was her vulnerability combined with her obvious courage, or maybe just the basic human decency his parents had instilled in him. Whatever the reason, he'd made his choice. Now, he just had to figure out how to keep her safe in a world that rarely favored the underdog. Over the next few days, Cade and Bethany settled into an unexpected rhythm. True to her word, she insisted on contributing to the household despite his concerns about her condition. Each morning, he would wake to find her already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with supplies from his modest pantry, transformed in ways he'd never considered into meals that made his own cooking seem woefully inadequate. Where did you learn to cook like this? He asked one morning, savoring a plate of perfectly prepared flapjacks with preserves. Bethany smiled, the expression lighting her tired face. My mother taught me before she passed. Then, as a governess, I often helped in the kitchen when the children were with their tutors. Cade noticed how she seemed to relax when speaking of cooking or household matters, neutral territory that didn't touch on the painful circumstances that had brought her to his door. He encouraged these conversations, hungry not just for her excellent food but for the gradual easing of the wariness in her eyes. When he returned from working the ranch each afternoon, he often found the house tidier than it had been in years. His clothes appeared, mended and folded on his bed. Despite his protests that she should rest, Bethany was determined to earn her keep. "I can't sit idle all day," she told him firmly when he suggested she take more rest. "The baby and I are fine, and keeping busy helps me not to worry." So he relented, though he drew the line at her doing laundry or any task that required heavy lifting or exposure to the elements. Those chores remained his domain, along with all the ranch work that kept his small herd of cattle healthy and his crops tended. On the 5th day of her stay, Cade returned from town with supplies and a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Bethany asked when he placed it on the table before her. "Open it," he encouraged, suddenly feeling awkward. "It's nothing much." She carefully unwrapped the package to reveal several yards of soft cotton fabric in a pale blue pattern, along with thread, buttons, and other sewing notions. "I noticed your dress was wearing thin," Cade explained, feeling heat rise to his face. "The shopkeeper's wife helped me choose. She said it would be suitable for your condition." Bethany ran her fingers over the fabric, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Cade feared he'd overstepped, been too presumptuous. Then she looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is the kindest gift," she said softly. "I've been wearing the same dress for weeks now. Thank you." Relief washed over him. "You're welcome. I also picked up some other things." He indicated the rest of his purchases, more food supplies, a bottle of tonic the apothecary recommended for expectant mothers, and several books he'd noticed her eyeing on his shelves. "You shouldn't spend your money on me," she protested, though her fingers lingered on the books. "My money's mine to spend as I see fit," Cade replied simply. "And right now, making sure you and the little one are comfortable seems a good use for it." She didn't argue further, but spent the evening cutting and sewing, transforming the fabric into a practical yet attractive dress that accommodated her growing belly. Cade pretended to read but found himself watching her skilled hands work, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the occasional soft hum that escaped her lips when she was focused. It was in these quiet moments that he began to sense a dangerous shift in his feelings. What had begun as simple Christian charity was becoming something more complicated. He admired her resilience, enjoyed her company, looked forward to returning home each day in a way he never had before. But she was vulnerable, dependent on him, and grieving a husband she'd clearly loved deeply. The last thing she needed was unwanted attention from the man providing her sanctuary. So Cade kept a careful distance, maintaining a friendly but respectful demeanor, never allowing himself to cross the invisible line he'd drawn. If he sometimes found himself wondering what it would be like to see her smile without the shadow of fear behind it, or to have her presence in his home become permanent rather than temporary, he kept those thoughts firmly to himself. One evening, about 2 weeks after Bethany's arrival, they sat by the fire after dinner. Outside, a light rain pattered against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the normally austere house. Bethany was darning one of Cade's socks while he whittled a small piece of wood, a hobby he'd picked up from his father. "What are you making?" she asked, nodding toward his hands. He looked down at the emerging shape. "A horse, I think, or it might become a cow." He smiled ruefully. "I'm not especially skilled." "May I see your other carvings?" Somewhat self-consciously, Cade retrieved a small wooden box from a shelf. Inside were perhaps a dozen small figures, animals mostly, but also a few human forms, all simply rendered but showing a certain charm in their imperfection. Bethany examined them, her expression genuinely interested rather than merely polite. "These are lovely," she said, picking up a carving of a wolf. "You've captured something of their spirit." "My father was the real craftsman," Cade admitted. "He could make anything from a piece of wood. I just do it to keep my hands busy in the evenings." "What happened to your parents?" she asked, then quickly added, "If you don't mind my asking." Cade set down his knife and the half-formed horse. "They had a small ranch in Montana. Fever took them both the same winter, 8 years ago. My brother Carl stayed to run the place, but I wanted my own land." He gestured to encompass the house and, by extension, his property beyond. "So I came to California, worked on other men's ranches until I saved enough to buy this place." "You've done well," Bethany observed. "Creating something from nothing that takes character." Her simple praise warmed him more than it should have. "What about your family?" he asked, realizing he knew little about her beyond her circumstances with the Ellis family. A shadow crossed her face. "My mother died when I was 14. My father was a school teacher, but his health was poor. He couldn't work much after Mother died, so I took positions as a maid, then as a governess when I was old enough." She set down her mending. "He passed 3 years ago. I was already working for the Ellis family by then." "And that's where you met Benjamin," Cade prompted gently. For once, she didn't flinch at her husband's name. "Yes. He used to visit his sister, bring her gifts. He noticed me reading during my breaks books from the family library. He started bringing me books too." A genuine smile touched her lips at the memory. "We would discuss them when he visited. He said I was the only person who didn't see him as just another Ellis. He sounds like a good man." He was. Bethany's hand moved to her belly in what Cade had come to recognize as an unconscious gesture of connection to her child. "That's why I can't let his family take this baby. Ben wanted our child to grow up understanding the value of kindness over wealth, of character over position. They would raise our baby to be everything Ben rejected." The vehemence in her voice spoke of deep conviction, and Cade found himself admiring her all the more for it. "They won't get the chance," he assured her. "We'll make sure of that." She looked up at his use of "we," a question in her eyes that Cade wasn't entirely sure how to answer. Before he could try, a sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. Cade rose quickly, motioning for Bethany to remain seated. "Stay calm," he whispered. "It's probably nothing." But even as he said it, he reached for the rifle that hung over the fireplace. No one came calling at this hour without a reason, especially not in the rain. He moved to the window first, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could make out the shape of a man on horseback, and behind him, another rider. Both wore long coats against the weather, hats pulled low. Bethany had risen despite his instruction, her face pale with fear. "Is it them?" she whispered. "I can't tell," Cade replied honestly. "But whoever it is, they won't take you anywhere. Go upstairs, lock the door, and don't come out until I call for you." She hesitated only briefly before nodding and moving swiftly toward the stairs, one hand supporting her belly as she climbed. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Cade waited until he heard the bedroom door close before approaching his front door, rifle held ready but not raised. He took a deep breath, then opened the door just enough to see who stood on his porch. 2 men stared back at him, water dripping from the brims of their hats. The first was older, perhaps 50, with a well-trimmed beard and expensive clothing beneath his duster. The second was younger, clearly a hired man of some sort, with the hard eyes of someone accustomed to difficult work. "Evening," Cade said evenly. "What brings you out in this weather?" The older man cleared his throat. "Good evening, sir. I apologize for the late hour. My name is Harold Ellis, and this is Mr. Dawson, my associate. We're looking for a young woman, my daughter-in-law, in fact. She's in a delicate condition and not in her right mind since my son's passing. The family is quite concerned for her welfare." So this was Bethany's father-in-law. Cade kept his expression neutral. "Sorry to hear that. What makes you think she'd be out this way?" Ellis smiled thinly. "We've been tracking her movements. She was seen in Sacramento a few weeks ago, and we have reason to believe she headed in this direction. Haven't seen any lone women in delicate condition or otherwise," Cade replied, matching the man's formal tone. "Not much traffic on this road except for my neighbors and the occasional peddler." The man called Dawson stepped forward. "Mind if we have a look around, just to be thorough?" Cade's grip tightened on his rifle. "I mind very much. This is private property and it's late." "I've told you I haven't seen your daughter-in-law." Harold Ellis's polite demeanor slipped slightly, revealing a harder edge beneath. "Mr. Kavanagh, Cade Kavanagh, Mr. Kavanagh, I understand your desire for privacy, but Bethany is carrying my grandchild, the last living link to my son. Surely you can understand a family's concern." "I can understand concern," Cade agreed, "but not riding up to a stranger's house after dark, demanding to search the premises. If your daughter-in-law is running from you, maybe there's a reason for that." A flash of anger crossed the older man's face before he controlled it. "You misunderstand the situation. Bethany is unwell, emotional since Benjamin's death. She's not thinking clearly about what's best for the child." "Seems to me that a child's mother usually knows what's best," Cade replied, letting a hint of steel enter his voice. "Now, I've already told you she's not here. I suggest you move on before this weather gets worse." Ellis studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he reached into his coat and produced a calling card, extending it toward Cade. "If you should happen to see her or hear anything, please contact me at this address in Sacramento. There's a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return." Cade made no move to take the card. "Not interested in rewards, Mr. Ellis. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early morning tomorrow." With obvious reluctance, Ellis replaced the card in his pocket. "Very well, Mr. Kavanagh. We'll continue our search elsewhere." He tipped his hat with false civility. "Good evening to you." Cade watched as the two men returned to their horses and mounted up, turning back toward the road. Only when they had disappeared into the rainy darkness did he close and bolt the door, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He set the rifle down and quickly climbed the stairs, knocking softly on Bethany's door. "It's me," he called. "They're gone." The lock turned and the door opened to reveal Bethany standing there, her face ashen. "It was them, wasn't it, Harold Ellis?" Cade nodded grimly. "He's looking for you, all right, and he's not likely to give up easily." Bethany's composure, maintained so carefully over the past weeks, finally crumbled. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They found me," she whispered. "I led them right to you. I'm so sorry, Cade." Without thinking, he reached for her, pulling her gently into his arms as she began to sob in earnest. "Shh, it's all right," he murmured, one hand smoothing her hair. "They didn't find you, I sent them away." "They'll come back," she said against his shirt, "or they'll send the sheriff." "They won't stop." Cade held her carefully, mindful of her condition and the propriety of their situation, but unwilling to let her face this fear alone. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I told you I would protect you, and I meant it. If they come back, they'll find the same answer. This is your home now, for as long as you need it to be." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, her tear-stained face questioning. "But why? Why would you put yourself at risk for me?" Cade found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain what he barely understood himself? That in the short time she'd been here, she had transformed his solitary existence into something warmer and more meaningful. That he admired her courage and resilience more than he could say. That he was coming to care for her in a way that both exhilarated and terrified him. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, choosing the safest answer. "And because no one has the right to take a child from its mother without just cause." It wasn't the whole truth, but it seemed to reassure her. Bethany straightened, wiping the tears from her face with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been the one to find me that night." Cade stepped back, restoring a proper distance between them. "You'd have found another way," he said with conviction. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." A small smile curved her lips. "Perhaps, but I'm glad it was you all the same." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken hovering in the air between them before Cade cleared his throat. "You should rest. I'll keep watch tonight in case they decide to return." Bethany nodded. "Good night, Cade." "Good night, Bethany," he replied softly, turning to head back downstairs. As he settled into a chair with a clear view of both the front door and the road beyond, Cade knew that Harold Ellis's visit had changed everything. This was no longer just a matter of offering temporary shelter to someone in need. By turning Ellis away, by effectively hiding Bethany, he had placed himself directly in opposition to a powerful man. And yet, remembering the feel of Bethany in his arms, the trust she placed in him, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Whatever came next, whatever danger Ellis might represent, Cade was committed now not just to protecting Bethany and her unborn child, but to ensuring they had a future free from fear and coercion. A future that, increasingly, he found himself hoping might somehow include him. The visit from Harold Ellis changed the atmosphere at the ranch. Where before there had been a growing ease between Cade and Bethany, now tension crept back and not between them, but around them, like a storm cloud hovering on the horizon. Cade took to carrying his revolver even when working on the property. At night, he checked and rechecked the locks, made sure his rifle was loaded and within reach. Bethany tried to maintain her routine of cooking and light housekeeping, but Cade noticed the shadows under her eyes deepening, the way she startled at unexpected sounds. Her pregnancy was progressing, her belly more pronounced now, and with it came discomforts she tried to hide, but that he couldn't help noticing the way she pressed a hand to her lower back when she thought he wasn't looking, how she sometimes paused to catch her breath after climbing the stairs. A week after the Ellis visit, Cade returned from town with more supplies and troubling news. "They've posted notices," he told Bethany as he unloaded his purchases. "All over Sacramento. Missing woman with child, reward for information." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the table. Bethany stared at the crude drawing that accompanied the text. It didn't look much like her, but the description was accurate enough: young woman with blue eyes and brown hair, approximately 5 months with child, last seen wearing a green dress. "They're making it sound like I'm the criminal," she said, her voice tight. "As if I've stolen something that belongs to them." "In their minds you have," Cade replied grimly. "The baby is an Ellis heir, that's all they care about." She sank into a chair, one hand protectively covering her belly. "What am I going to do? I can't hide forever. Soon the baby will come, and then—" Cade sat across from her, reaching for her free hand without thinking. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "The Ellis family may have money and influence, but they don't own the law. You're the mother. You have rights." "Rights that require money to defend," Bethany pointed out. "I have nothing but what I carried with me when I ran." Cade squeezed her hand gently. "You have me," he said simply. And I'm not without resources. It wasn't strictly true. While his ranch was profitable enough to support him comfortably, he wasn't a wealthy man by any measure. Legal battles cost money, and going up against the Ellis family would be expensive. But seeing the fear in Bethany's eyes, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge those practical concerns. Besides, he added with forced lightness, they haven't found you yet. With luck, they'll give up eventually. They both knew it was unlikely, but Bethany offered a small smile anyway, turning her hand to return his squeeze before gently withdrawing it. Thank you for the warning. I'll be more careful. I was thinking, Cade said after a moment, perhaps we should have the doctor from town come check on you, just to make sure everything's progressing as it should with the baby. Bethany's expression immediately clouded with worry. Is that safe? What if he tells someone I'm here? Dr. Morgan is a good man, discreet, Cade assured her. I've known him since I came to these parts. He treats his patients' privacy as sacred. She considered this, conflict evident in her expression. I should have someone check on the baby, she admitted finally. It's been months since I've seen a doctor. I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with him, Cade promised. He can come here so you don't have to risk being seen. The following afternoon, true to his word, Cade returned with Dr. Joseph Morgan, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a reassuring manner. After brief introductions, Cade excused himself to tend to chores outside, giving Bethany privacy for her examination. An hour later, the doctor emerged onto the porch where Cade was splitting wood, his medical bag in hand. How is she? Cade asked immediately, setting down his axe. Dr. Morgan smiled. Mother and child both appear healthy, though Mrs. Ellis could use more rest and better nutrition. She's carrying a bit small, but that's not uncommon with first babies, especially given the stress she's been under. Relief washed over Cade. And the baby, when do you think? Hard to say precisely, but I'd estimate 6 to 8 weeks, early January perhaps. The doctor's expression grew more serious. She told me about her situation with the Ellis family, rather delicate matter. I'm helping her stay hidden, Cade said directly, not bothering to dissemble. They want to take her child. Dr. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. So she said, I've heard of such cases, though I can't say I approve. A child belongs with its mother, absent exceptional circumstances. He studied Cade for a moment. You care for her. It wasn't a question, and Cade didn't bother denying it. I do. She deserves better than what life's dealt her lately. Indeed. The doctor closed his bag. Well, Mr. Kavanagh, you may count on my discretion. I'll return in 3 weeks to check on her progress, sooner if you send for me. Cade extended his hand. Thank you, doctor. What do I owe you? Dr. Morgan waved away the offer. Consider it a professional courtesy. Just make sure she rests more and eats well. She'll need her strength for the delivery. After the doctor departed, Cade found Bethany in the kitchen, preparing dinner with a lightness in her movements he hadn't seen in days. Dr. Morgan says you need more rest, he remarked from the doorway. She looked up, a genuine smile brightening her face. The baby is healthy, Cade. Strong heartbeat, good position. Everything as it should be. Her joy was infectious, and Cade found himself smiling in return. That's wonderful news. It feels real now, she said softly, one hand on her belly. With everything that's happened, sometimes it was hard to focus on the baby itself rather than just the circumstances. Her eyes met his, shining with emotion. Thank you for bringing the doctor. It was exactly what I needed. I'm glad, Cade replied, moved by her happiness. But he was serious about you needing more rest. You're doing too much around here. Bethany shook her head. I like keeping busy. It helps me feel useful, like I'm earning my keep. You don't need to earn anything, he told her earnestly. Your presence here is. It's not a burden, Bethany. Far from it. She looked at him curiously, as if trying to decipher his meaning. Before she could respond, a sharp kick from the baby made her gasp, then laugh. "Someone is feeling lively today," she said. Then, making a quick decision, she crossed to where Cade stood and took his hand. "Would you like to feel? The baby's been moving a lot since the examination." Cade hesitated, suddenly unsure. This seemed an intimate thing, a privilege perhaps reserved for family, for the child's father who was no longer there to experience it. "It's all right," Bethany said softly, seeming to read his uncertainty. "I'd like you to. You've done so much for us." Tentatively, Cade allowed her to guide his hand to the curve of her belly. For a moment there was nothing, and then a firm push against his palm, unmistakably a tiny foot or hand. His breath caught in his throat. "That's amazing," he whispered, genuinely awestruck. Bethany smiled up at him. "It is, isn't it? A little miracle." Their eyes met and held, something shifting between them in that moment of shared wonder. Cade became acutely aware of how close they stood, of the warmth of her beneath his hand, of how right it felt to share this moment with her. Then the moment passed, both of them drawing back slightly. Bethany returned to her cooking, and Cade moved to set the table. But something had changed, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name, but that existed nonetheless, growing stronger with each passing day. As November deepened toward December, the weather turned colder. Frost rimmed the windows each morning, and Cade found himself chopping extra wood to keep the house warm. Bethany continued to help around the house, though he noticed she had started taking afternoon rests without his prompting. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, her movements slower, more deliberate. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Bethany working on a small blanket she was knitting for the baby while Cade mended a bridle, she spoke of something that had clearly been on her mind. "What happens after the baby comes?" she asked quietly, her eyes on her needles. Cade looked up, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I can't stay here indefinitely," she said. "You've been incredibly generous, but this arrangement, it was only meant to be temporary. Until I had the baby, until I could figure out where to go next." The thought of Bethany leaving with the baby sent an unexpected pang through Cade's heart. He'd grown accustomed to her presence, to the sound of her voice, to the way she'd transformed his solitary existence into something he now realized he'd been missing all along, a home, not just a house. "There's no rush," he said carefully. "You're welcome here for as long as you need." Bethany set down her knitting. "That's just it. I don't know when that will be. The Ellis family won't stop looking, not until they find me, or," she hesitated, "or until they believe I'm no longer a threat to their plans." "What are you saying?" "I've been thinking," she said slowly. "Perhaps I should leave California altogether. Go east, maybe, or north to Oregon, somewhere they wouldn't think to look." The idea of her traveling so far, alone with a newborn, filled Cade with alarm. "That's not safe," he protested. "And you'd have no support, no one to help you." "What choice do I have?" she asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. "I can't keep hiding forever, and I can't keep putting you at risk. The longer I stay, the more likely it is they'll find me here, and then you'll be in trouble too, harboring a fugitive, they might call it." "You're not a fugitive," Cade said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong. The law might see it differently, especially with the Ellis influence behind it." Cade set aside the bridle, trying to organize his thoughts. Over the past weeks, as he'd watched Bethany's quiet courage, her determination to protect her child, he'd come to care for her more deeply than he'd intended. But he'd kept those feelings carefully contained, knowing she was still grieving her husband, still finding her way through a difficult situation. Now, faced with the prospect of her leaving, he found himself considering options he'd barely allowed himself to contemplate. "What if," he began, then paused, weighing his words carefully. What if there was another way? Something that would give you legal protection against the Ellis family's claims. Bethany looked at him questioningly. What do you mean? Cade took a deep breath. Marriage, he said simply. If you were to remarry, your new husband would have legal standing as the baby's stepfather. It would complicate the Ellis family's claim considerably. Her eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. Cade, are you suggesting? It would be a marriage of convenience, he hastened to add, not wanting to pressure her or assume too much. On paper only, but it would give you and the baby the protection of my name, my home. He met her gaze steadily. I would never presume to replace your husband in your heart, Bethany. But I can offer you safety, security. Bethany stared at him, clearly stunned by the proposal. You would do that. Tie yourself to a widow with another man's child, make yourself a target for the Ellis family. I would, Cade said simply. I care what happens to you, to the baby. And he stopped, uncertain how much to reveal. I've grown accustomed to having you here. The house feels more like a home with you in it. Tears welled in Bethany's eyes, but whether from emotion or dismay, he couldn't tell. Cade, I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected. You don't have to answer now, he assured her quickly. Think about it. It's a practical solution, that's all. One that would allow you to stay, to raise your child in peace. She nodded slowly. I will think about it. It's a generous offer, more than I could have expected. Take all the time you need, Cade said, rising from his chair. I should check on the horses before turning in. Good night, Bethany. Good night, Cade, she replied softly, her expression thoughtful as he left the room. In the cold night air of the barn, Cade berated himself for his impulsiveness. He hadn't planned to propose such an arrangement, hadn't even fully considered it himself, until the words were out of his mouth. Now he'd put Bethany in an awkward position, perhaps made her uncomfortable in the very place she needed to feel safe. And yet, as he went about his evening chores, he couldn't bring himself to regret the offer entirely. The idea of making their arrangement permanent, of providing a real home for Bethany and her child, felt right in a way few things had in his solitary life. He just hoped he hadn't ruined the trust they'd built by moving too quickly, asking too much. When he returned to the house an hour later, it was dark and quiet. Bethany had gone up to bed, the fire banked for the night. Cade sat alone in his chair for a long time, staring into the dying embers and wondering what the morning would bring. The answer came earlier than expected. He awoke before dawn to the sound of movement downstairs. Pulling on his clothes quickly, he descended to find Bethany in the kitchen, already dressed and preparing breakfast as usual. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm but resolute. Good morning, she said. I hope I didn't wake you. No, I'm often up this early, Cade replied, studying her face for any sign of her thoughts. Bethany, about last night, I've been thinking about your proposal, she interrupted gently. All night, in fact. Cade braced himself, certain from her manner that she was about to refuse, to tell him that she appreciated his offer but couldn't accept. He prepared to assure her that nothing would change, that she was still welcome to stay regardless. I'll marry you, Bethany said quietly. If you're certain it's what you want. Cade stared at her, momentarily speechless. You will, she nodded, a small smile touching her lips. It's a practical arrangement, as you said. It protects the baby, gives us both security. Her gaze was direct, honest. I can't offer you love, Cade, not yet. My heart is still healing, but I can offer respect, friendship, and my best effort to make a good home for us all. That's more than enough, Cade assured her, relief and an unexpected happiness spreading through him. I didn't expect that is. I know you still love your husband. I would never ask you to pretend otherwise. Benjamin would want me to be safe, to do what's best for our child, Bethany said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. And I believe this is it. You're a good man, Cade Kavanagh. I couldn't ask for a better stepfather for my baby. Cade crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. I promise you won't regret this. I'll do everything in my power to keep you and the little one safe and happy. Bethany squeezed his hands. I know you will. Then, with a hint of her practical nature reasserting itself, she added, we should do it soon, before the baby comes, and quietly, no announcement that might reach the Ellis family. Agreed, Cade said. I'll ride into town today, speak with the pastor about coming here to perform the ceremony. Just us and a couple of witnesses, my neighbors, the Thompsons. They're good people, discreet. Bethany nodded. That sounds perfect. As they stood there, hands joined in the early morning light of his kitchen, soon to be their kitchen, Cade felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This might have begun as an arrangement of convenience, a practical solution to a difficult situation. But standing here with Bethany, seeing the trust in her eyes, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps, in time, it might become something more. True to his word, Cade rode into Sacramento that morning to make arrangements. Pastor Williams, who had known Cade since he first settled in the area, agreed to perform a private ceremony at the ranch in 2 days' time. Cade also visited the Thompsons, who readily agreed to serve as witnesses, having already formed a friendly opinion of Bethany during their occasional visits. His last stop was the jeweler's shop, where he selected a simple gold band for Bethany. It wasn't fancy, he couldn't afford anything elaborate, but it was solid and well-crafted, like the commitment he was making. When he returned home, Bethany was resting, as Dr. Morgan had advised. Cade used the opportunity to make improvements around the house that he'd been putting off for too long, fixing a loose step on the porch, rehanging a shutter that had been damaged in a storm, clearing out space in his wardrobe for Bethany's few belongings. Small things, but they felt significant as he prepared their home for this new chapter. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and cold, a perfect December day. Pastor Williams arrived first, followed by the Thompsons' Mary Thompson, bringing a small cake she'd baked for the occasion and flowers from her winter greenhouse to serve as Bethany's bouquet. The ceremony itself was brief and simple, conducted in the main room of the house with a fire crackling in the hearth. Bethany wore her new blue dress, her hair arranged simply but elegantly, the small bouquet of winter roses in her hands. Cade, who owned one good suit that rarely saw use, had polished his boots and trimmed his beard for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, promising to honor and cherish each other until death parted them, Cade was struck by the solemnity of the moment despite the unusual circumstances. This might have begun as a practical arrangement, but the words they spoke were no less meaningful for it. When he slipped the gold band onto Bethany's finger, her hand trembled slightly in his. She looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and direct, and in that moment, Cade silently made another vow, one not included in the ceremony, to be worthy of the trust she was placing in him, to be the kind of husband and stepfather that would make her glad of her choice. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Pastor Williams declared. You may kiss the bride. This was a moment they hadn't discussed, and Cade hesitated, not wanting to presume. But Bethany solved the dilemma by rising slightly on her toes and placing a soft, brief kiss on his lips, a seal on their covenant. Nothing more, but enough to make his heart skip a beat. The small celebration that followed was warm and genuinely happy. Mary Thompson had brought not just cake, but a complete meal to mark the occasion, insisting that a bride shouldn't cook on her wedding day. The Thompsons treated the union as entirely normal and joyous, making no reference to the unusual speed of the courtship or Bethany's condition. Pastor Williams offered a blessing for the new family. including a special prayer for the safe arrival of the baby, before departing with a promise to visit again after the birth. By late afternoon, they were alone again, the house quieter but somehow changed, no longer Cade's house where Bethany stayed, but their home, shared equally. "Are you tired?" Cade asked, noticing how Bethany's hand occasionally moved to support her lower back. "You should rest," she smiled. "A little. It's been an eventful day." "Indeed it has, Mrs. Kavanagh," he replied, testing the new name. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "That will take some getting used to." "For us both," Cade agreed. Then, more seriously, "Bethany, I want you to know that nothing has to change between us. I meant what I said about this being a practical arrangement. I don't expect—" "I know," she said gently, "and I appreciate that. But something has changed, Cade. We're family now, legally and in truth." Her hand moved to her belly. "The three of us." The simple statement moved him deeply. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." That evening they settled into a new routine. Cade insisted on cleaning up after dinner despite Bethany's protests. Then they sat by the fire as they often did, but with a new awareness of their altered status. When it came time to retire, Cade walked Bethany to her door, still her separate room, a boundary he respected absolutely. "Good night, Bethany," he said softly. "Sleep well." She paused at the threshold, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Cade, for everything. I know this isn't how you imagined your life would go." "No," he agreed with a small smile. "It's better." The sincerity in his voice seemed to touch her. She reached up and, for the second time that day, pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Good night, husband," she whispered, before slipping into her room and closing the door. Cade stood there for a moment, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been, before turning to his own room. As marriages went, theirs had the strangest of beginnings. But as he prepared for bed, Cade found himself filled with a quiet optimism about their future, a future that, just weeks ago, he could never have imagined but now couldn't picture any other way. Word of their marriage spread quickly through the small community, as news inevitably did in rural areas. While some might have raised eyebrows at the hasty union and Bethany's obvious pregnancy, most accepted Cade's simple explanation that they had married quickly due to her condition, with no further details offered about her past. To Cade's relief, there was no immediate reaction from the Ellis family. Whether they hadn't yet heard of the marriage or were still searching for Bethany elsewhere, he couldn't say, but he was grateful for every peaceful day that passed, bringing them closer to the baby's arrival without interference. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit that Cade hadn't experienced in his home since childhood. Bethany insisted on decorating despite her advancing pregnancy, directing Cade to hang evergreen boughs over the fireplace and doorways, fashioning simple ornaments from pine cones and ribbon. She baked special treats, gingerbread, and sugar cookies, filling the house with delicious aromas that made it feel more like a home than it ever had before. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged modest gifts by the light of the fire. Cade had ridden into town one last time to purchase a silver hairbrush and hand mirror for Bethany, an extravagance he'd saved for secretly. "Cade, it's beautiful," she exclaimed, running her fingers over the delicate floral pattern engraved on the back of the mirror. "But you've already given me so much." "Every bride deserves something pretty," he said simply. Bethany's eyes shone with emotion as she presented him with her gift, a warm woolen scarf she had knitted in secret during her afternoon rests. "It's not much," she said apologetically. "I would have made something finer if I'd had more time." Cade wrapped the scarf around his neck immediately, genuinely touched by the gift. "It's perfect," he assured her. "No one's made something just for me in a very long time." As they sat together by the fire that night, Bethany closer to his side than she might have sat before their marriage, a comfortable silence between them, Cade reflected on how drastically his life had changed in just a few short months. From solitary rancher to husband and soon-to-be stepfather, from a quiet house to a home filled with warmth and purpose. He glanced at Bethany, her face peaceful in the firelight, one hand resting on her rounded belly, and felt a surge of protectiveness and something deeper, something he wasn't quite ready to name, but that grew stronger with each passing day. The new year arrived with bitterly cold weather and the knowledge that the baby would soon follow. Dr. Morgan visited again, confirming that everything was progressing well and that they should expect the birth within the next 2 to 3 weeks. "Have you thought about names?" Cade asked one evening as they sat together, Bethany sewing baby clothes from fabric Cade had brought from town. She smiled. "For a boy, I'd like to name him Benjamin after his father. For a girl—" She hesitated. "I thought perhaps Catherine after your mother." Cade looked at her in surprise. "How did you know my mother's name was Catherine?" "You mentioned it once, when you were telling me about her teaching you to cook," Bethany replied. "It seemed fitting to honor the woman who raised such a good man." Deeply touched by her thoughtfulness, Cade could only nod in agreement. "Catherine is a beautiful name. My mother would be honored." As January progressed, Bethany's discomfort increased. She tried to maintain her usual activities but tired more easily, often needing to rest during the day. Cade insisted on taking over more of the household chores, coming in from the ranch earlier to prepare meals and tend to the house. One morning, as a fresh blanket of snow covered the ground outside, Bethany woke with a different kind of discomfort. By midday, there was no denying what was happening. The baby was coming, several days earlier than expected. Cade immediately sent their ranch hand, young Tom, who helped with the cattle, to fetch Dr. Morgan from town while he helped Bethany prepare. He built up the fire, boiled water as she directed, and gathered clean linens for the birth. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently as he helped her walk slowly around the room, something she said would help with the labor pains. Bethany's face was pale but determined. "Yes," she admitted. "But it's a natural thing, childbirth. Women have been doing it since the beginning of time." She paused, grimacing through another contraction. "Still, I'm glad you're here. I wouldn't want to be alone." "You're not alone," Cade assured her, supporting her weight as another pain came. "And you won't be. Not ever again." Dr. Morgan arrived late in the afternoon, just as Bethany's labor intensified. He promptly took charge, sending Cade downstairs to wait as was customary. But Bethany called him back. "Stay," she requested, her face contorted with pain but her eyes clear. "I want you here if you're willing." It wasn't traditional for husbands to be present at births, but then, nothing about their situation was traditional. Cade nodded, taking a position at the head of the bed where he could hold Bethany's hand without being in the doctor's way. What followed was the most intense experience of Cade's life. Bethany's labor was long and difficult, stretching from late afternoon into the night. She endured it with remarkable courage, though as the hours passed, her strength began to flag. "Doctor." Morgan's expression grew more concerned, and he spoke in low tones to Cade about the baby's position being somewhat difficult. "Talk to her," the doctor advised. "Keep her focused. She needs to find the strength for one final push." Cade leaned close to Bethany, whose face was flushed with effort, hair damp with sweat. "You can do this," he murmured, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest person I know, Bethany Cavanaugh, just a little more." She gripped his hand with surprising force. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm so tired." "Yes, you can," Cade insisted. "Think of your baby. Think of holding him or her in your arms. We're going to be a family, remember, the three of us, but we need you to be strong right now." Something in his words seemed to reach her. Bethany's eyes cleared and she nodded, gathering herself for one more effort. With a cry that Cade felt in his very soul, she gave a final push. The sound that followed was the most beautiful Cade had ever heard, the indignant wail of a newborn, announcing its arrival in the world. "A girl, Doctor," Morgan announced, a smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "A healthy baby girl." Tears streamed down Bethany's face as the doctor placed the tiny, squalling infant on her chest. "Catherine," she whispered, looking down at her daughter with pure love. "Hello, my sweet Catherine." Cade stared at the miraculous scene before him. Bethany, exhausted but radiant, cradling her newborn daughter. His wife and her child. His family. The emotion that swept through him was overwhelming, a love so fierce and protective it took his breath away. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like her mother." Bethany looked up at him, something new in her expression, a tenderness, a connection forged through the shared intensity of Catherine's birth. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked softly. Terrified but eager, Cade carefully took the tiny bundle into his arms. Catherine had quieted now, her eyes blue like her mother's, seemingly focused on his face despite what he knew about newborns' limited vision. A shock of dark hair, perhaps from her father, dusted her small head. "Hello, Catherine," he said softly. I'm your pa." The word felt strange on his tongue but right in his heart. "And I promise to take care of you and your ma for as long as I live." As if understanding, Catherine's tiny hand escaped the swaddling blanket and wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Cade knew without doubt that biology didn't matter. This child was his in every way that counted, and he would love her as his own for all his days. The weeks following Catherine's birth were a blur of joy and exhaustion. Bethany recovered her strength gradually, while Cade learned the basics of infant care alongside her. He'd never imagined himself changing napkins or walking the floor with a crying baby at 2 in the morning, but he took to these new duties with a willingness that surprised even him. Catherine, or Katie as they began calling her, was a generally good-natured baby with a healthy appetite and strong lungs. She had her mother's blue eyes and delicate features, but there was something in the shape of her mouth and the determination in her tiny fists that reminded Bethany of Benjamin. "He would have loved her so much," she said one evening as she nursed Katie by the fire, a bittersweet smile on her face. Cade, seated nearby mending a bridle, looked up. "I'm sure he would have. She's easy to love." Bethany studied him for a moment. "You've been remarkable with her," she observed. "Most men wouldn't take so naturally to an infant, especially one not of their blood." "She's mine in all the ways that matter," Cade replied simply. "Besides, it's not hard to care for someone so perfect." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Katie's soft nursing sounds. Cade had noticed a gradual change in their relationship since the birth, a deepening of the trust and friendship that had begun during Bethany's stay, now enhanced by their shared care of Catherine. They still maintained separate bedrooms, still approached their marriage as the practical arrangement it had begun as, but there was an undeniable warmth growing between them, a closeness that went beyond mere friendship. February brought milder weather and a visit that shattered their peaceful routine. Cade was in the barn when he heard the sound of approaching horses, not one or two, but several. Instantly alert, he moved to the barn door and looked out to see 3 men riding up to the house. His heart sank as he recognized Harold Ellis among them. Moving quickly, Cade interceded before they could reach the front door. "Mr. Ellis," he said evenly, stepping into their path. "This is a surprise." Ellis dismounted, his expression cold. "Mr. Kavanagh, I believe you have something that belongs to my family." "There's nothing here that belongs to you," Cade replied, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "My daughter-in-law and grandchild," Ellis said flatly. "I know they're here. We've finally tracked her to this area, and several people in town confirmed that you recently married a pregnant widow." His smile was unpleasant. "Rather hasty nuptials. I understand. One might almost think they weren't entirely legitimate." Cade's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but he stopped himself. Violence wouldn't solve this. "My wife is inside with our daughter," he said firmly, "and they're staying right here where they belong." "Your wife?" Ellis's eyebrows rose. "I think the courts might have something to say about that. Bethany was still legally married to my son when she fled. Any subsequent marriage would be invalid bigamy, in fact. A serious offense." Cold fear washed over Cade. "Benjamin Ellis was dead before Bethany came here," he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. Could Bethany have lied about her husband's death? No, he couldn't believe that. "Was he?" Ellis asked with mock innocence. "Do you have proof of that? A death certificate, perhaps?" "I don't recall issuing public notice of my son's passing." Before Cade could respond, the front door opened, and Bethany appeared, Catherine bundled in her arms. She had obviously heard the commotion and recognized the voices. "Benjamin is dead, Harold," she said clearly, stepping forward despite Cade's gesture for her to stay back. "You know that as well as I do. He died in the accident at the docks last September." Ellis turned to her, his expression softening in a way that seemed calculated rather than genuine. "Bethany, my dear, you look well, and this must be my grandchild." He moved toward her, but Cade stepped between them. "That's close enough," he warned. Ellis ignored him, speaking directly to Bethany. "This has gone on long enough. It's time to come home where you and the baby belong. Whatever grievances you think you have against the family, surely we can resolve them like civilized people." "There's nothing to resolve," Bethany replied, her voice steady though Cade could see the fear in her eyes. "I'm married to Cade now. Catherine is his daughter in the eyes of the law and in our hearts. We're happy here." Ellis's face hardened. "This farce of a marriage won't stand up in court, and you know it. You were in no position to remarry so quickly after Benjamin's death. The proper mourning period alone is not legally required," came a new voice. All heads turned to see Sheriff Thomas Drake riding up, accompanied by Dr. Morgan. The sheriff dismounted, approaching the tense group with a hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Am I interrupting something here, gentlemen? Madam?" Ellis straightened, adopting a dignified air. "Sheriff, I'm glad you're here. I'm attempting to recover my daughter-in-law and grandchild who have been kept from their rightful family." "Is that so?" The sheriff looked to Bethany. "Mrs. Kavanagh, are you being kept here against your will?" "Absolutely not," Bethany replied firmly. "This is my home, my husband, and my daughter. Mr. Ellis has no claim on us." "She's confused, Sheriff," Ellis insisted. "Possibly not in her right mind since my son's death. The child is an Ellis, the last of the direct line. She belongs with her father's family." Dr. Morgan stepped forward. "If I may, Sheriff, I attended Mrs. Kavanagh during her pregnancy and delivery. I can attest to her sound mind and excellent mothering. The child is thriving under her care." The sheriff nodded, then turned to Cade. "And you, Kavanagh, what's your stake in this?" "Bethany is my wife," Cade said simply. "Catherine is my daughter in every way that matters. I'll protect them with my life if necessary." Drake studied the group for a long moment, clearly assessing the situation. Finally, he turned to Ellis. "Mr. Ellis, I don't know what the custom is in San Francisco, but around here, we don't separate mothers from their babies without extremely compelling reasons." I see no evidence of any such reason here. This isn't over, Sheriff, Ellis warned. I have resources, connections. The courts will see things differently. Perhaps, Drake acknowledged. But until a court orders otherwise, Mrs. Kavanagh and her child stay right where they are. Now I suggest you and your men return to town. This is private property and you're not welcome here. For a tense moment it seemed Ellis might refuse. Then with a cold smile he nodded. Very well, Sheriff. We'll pursue this through the proper channels. He looked at Bethany. Don't get too comfortable, my dear. This little idle won't last. With that parting threat, he and his men mounted up and rode away. Cade immediately moved to Bethany's side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, though she was visibly shaken. For now. But he won't give up, Cade. He meant what he said. The sheriff approached them, his expression serious. Doc Morgan rode out to fetch me when he heard Ellis was asking questions in town. Thought there might be trouble. Thank you, Sheriff, Cade said sincerely. And you, Doctor, Drake nodded. You two need to be prepared. Ellis is right about one thing: he has resources. If he petitions the court in San Francisco, he might get a sympathetic hearing. What can we do? Bethany asked, her arms tightening around Catherine. First, make sure your marriage is properly recorded, Drake advised. I'll take the documentation myself to the county clerk. Second, file formal adoption papers for the child, Mr. Kavanagh. As her stepfather, you have the right, especially with the biological father deceased. Dr. Morgan nodded in agreement. I can provide testimony if needed about Mrs. Kavanagh's fitness as a mother and the child's well-being. Cade felt a surge of gratitude for these men, near strangers, really, who were willing to stand by them. We appreciate the help, he said, more than we can say. After the sheriff and doctor departed, with promises to return if needed, Cade and Bethany retreated into the house, the day's events having left them both shaken. Catherine, oblivious to the drama, had fallen asleep in her mother's arms. He found us, Bethany whispered, the reality of it finally hitting her as she sank into a chair. After all this time, all our precautions. Cade knelt beside her, taking her free hand in his. But he didn't take you, he reminded her. And he won't. I promise you that, Bethany. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing something new in his face. You meant it, didn't you? What you said to the sheriff about Catherine being your daughter. Every word, Cade affirmed without hesitation. I know she's Benjamin's child by blood, but in my heart. He reached out to gently touch Catherine's tiny hand. In my heart, she's mine too. I couldn't love her more if she were. Tears filled Bethany's eyes. You're a good man, Cade Kavanagh, she said softly. Better than I deserve after bringing all this trouble to your door. You brought far more than trouble, he replied honestly. You brought life and warmth to a house that was just a building before. You and Catherine, you're my family now, and a man protects his family no matter what. Something shifted in Bethany's expression then. A softening, a decision made. Carefully cradling Catherine in one arm, she reached out with her free hand to touch Cade's face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. I think, she said quietly, I'm beginning to understand why fate led me to your barn that night. Before Cade could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him, not the brief, ceremonial kiss of their wedding day, but something deeper, truer. A beginning rather than an obligation. When they parted, Cade searched her face, hardly daring to hope. Bethany, I'm not ready to say the words yet, she admitted. It's still too soon, and there's too much uncertainty ahead. But I want you to know that this isn't just an arrangement of convenience for me anymore. It hasn't been for some time. Joy bloomed in Cade's heart, tempered by the reality of the threat they still faced, but no less genuine for it. Take all the time you need, he assured her. I'm not going anywhere." As if to seal this new understanding between them, Catherine stirred in Bethany's arms, her tiny face scrunching before relaxing again into sleep. Their daughter, their family, something worth fighting for, no matter what came next. The weeks that followed were filled with a mixture of deepening happiness within their home and growing tension from without. True to the sheriff's advice, Cade and Bethany formalized every aspect of their situation. Their marriage was properly recorded with the county, and Cade filed stepfather adoption papers for Catherine, a process that would take time, but that established his intentions clearly. Within their household, the dynamic continued to shift subtly. Bethany's kiss had marked a turning point, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since before Catherine's birth. They still maintained separate bedrooms, both agreed that some transitions shouldn't be rushed, but there was a new openness between them, expressions of affection that would have been unthinkable just months before. March arrived, bringing spring rains and news that the Ellis family had indeed petitioned a San Francisco court for custody of Catherine. Sheriff Drake delivered the summons himself, his expression grave. "They're claiming the marriage isn't valid due to insufficient time passed since Benjamin Ellis's death," he explained. "And they're asserting that a motherless child belongs with her paternal family, especially one of means." "But Catherine isn't motherless," Cade protested, anger rising in his voice. "Bethany is right here, caring for her daughter beautifully." The sheriff nodded. "I know that, and so does anyone with eyes, but Ellis has friends in high places, including on the bench. You need to be prepared for a fight." Bethany, who had been listening silently, Catherine asleep in her arms, finally spoke. "When must we appear in court?" 3 weeks from now in San Francisco," Drake replied. "I'd advise hiring a lawyer, the best you can afford." After he departed, Cade and Bethany sat at the kitchen table, the summons between them like a physical threat. "We knew this was coming," Bethany said quietly. "Harold Ellis never gives up when he wants something." Cade reached across the table to take her hand. "Neither do I," he said firmly. "We'll fight this, Bethany, all the way." She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his determination. "It will be expensive. A good lawyer, travel to San Francisco, lodging while we're there." "I have savings," Cade told her, "and if necessary, I can mortgage part of the ranch." "Catherine is worth it. You both are." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. "I never wanted to bring this kind of hardship to your door." "It's our door now," Cade reminded her gently. "Our struggle, our family." The next day, Cade rode into Sacramento to consult with a lawyer recommended by Sheriff Drake. Mr. Harmon was an older man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for taking on difficult cases, particularly those involving family disputes. "It won't be easy," he warned after reviewing their situation. "The Ellis family has considerable influence, but you have strong points in your favor: a legal marriage, a mother who has never been proven unfit, and a stepfather who has filed for adoption. Plus, there's the simple human fact that separating a baby from her mother is an extreme measure that most judges are reluctant to order without compelling cause." "What do you advise?" Cade asked, willing to do whatever was necessary. "Gather character witnesses, people who can testify to Mrs. Kavanaugh's fitness as a mother and to the stability of your home. The doctor is an excellent start. Anyone else who has observed your family life would be helpful." Cade thought of their neighbors, the Thompsons, who had been so supportive, and Pastor Williams, who had married them. "That can be arranged." "Good. Also, be prepared for personal attacks. They may try to paint your marriage as hasty or illegitimate, suggest improper motivations. They'll likely bring up Mrs. Kavanaugh's flight with the child, portraying it as kidnapping or erratic behavior. The thought of Bethany being attacked in court made Cade's blood boil, but he kept his anger in check. "We'll be ready." Mr. Harmon nodded approvingly. "One more thing, the appearance of a stable, loving home will matter greatly. The judge will be comparing what you offer to what the Ellis family can provide in terms of material advantages. Your home may be more modest, but if it's clear that it's a place of genuine love and care, that will count significantly." As Cade rode home, he reflected on the lawyer's words. Their home was indeed modest compared to what the Ellis family could offer, but it was filled with something he suspected had been lacking in that wealthy household: genuine warmth and love. Not just between him and Bethany, whose relationship was deepening every day, but in the atmosphere they created together for Catherine. When he arrived back at the ranch, he found Bethany on the porch, rocking Catherine in the afternoon sun. The sight of them, his wife and daughter, safe and content in the home they'd built together, strengthened his resolve. No court, no amount of Ellis money would take this from them if he had anything to say about it. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared for the court hearing while trying to maintain as much normalcy as possible for Catherine's sake. Friends and neighbors rallied around them: the Thompsons, Pastor Williams, Dr. Morgan, and even Sheriff Drake all agreed to provide testimony or written statements about the family's stability and Bethany's excellent care of her daughter. As the date of departure for San Francisco approached, Cade noticed Bethany growing quieter, more withdrawn. One evening, after Catherine had been put to bed, he found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the land that had become their home. "What is it?" he asked softly, taking the seat beside her. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not just of losing Catherine, though that terrifies me beyond words, but of facing them again, Harold and Victoria Ellis, of being back in their world where they hold all the power." Cade took her hand in his. "You're not alone this time," he reminded her. "I'll be right beside you, and so will Mr. Harmon, and you're stronger now than you were when you ran." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Because of you," she said simply. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. You married me to protect me and Catherine. You've been willing to risk everything for us." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I need you to know something before we face this together." "What is it?" Cade asked, his heart quickening at the intensity in her voice. "I love you," Bethany said softly but clearly. "Not out of gratitude or necessity, but truly. I didn't expect to love again after Benjamin died. I thought that part of my life was over, but you, with your quiet strength and endless kindness." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You made it impossible not to love you, Cade Kavanagh." Joy and wonder flooded through Cade at her words. He reached up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I've loved you since before Catherine was born," he confessed. "Maybe from that first morning when you insisted on making breakfast despite everything you'd been through. Your courage, your grace, I never stood a chance." He leaned forward then, kissing her with all the love that had been growing in his heart these many months. She responded in kind, her arms wrapping around his neck as they shared this new, profound connection, a true marriage now in every sense. When they finally parted, Bethany rested her forehead against his. "Whatever happens in San Francisco," she whispered, "know that you are my choice, my love. You are Catherine's father in all the ways that matter, and we will come back here to our home together." "Yes," Cade agreed, holding her close. "We will." That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared a bedroom, not out of passion, though that was part of it, but out of a deeper need to be close, to strengthen the bond that would carry them through the difficult days ahead. As they lay together in the darkness, Cade held Bethany against his heart and silently renewed his vow to protect her and Catherine, no matter what it took. The journey to San Francisco was long and tiring, especially with a 4-month-old infant. They traveled by stagecoach and then riverboat, arriving 2 days before the hearing to settle into modest lodgings arranged by Mr. Harmon. Catherine, remarkably adaptable, seemed to take the changes in stride, content as long as she was in her mother's arms or Cade's. The court hearing itself was held in an imposing building in the heart of San Francisco, a city that made Cade accustomed to open spaces and simple living feel distinctly out of place. The courtroom was formal and intimidating, with the Ellis family and their expensive lawyer already seated when Cade, Bethany, and Mr. Harmon arrived. Harold and Victoria Ellis sat rigidly upright, their wealth evident in their fine clothing and confident bearing. Beside them was a younger woman Cade didn't recognize but whom Bethany identified in a whisper as Anna, Benjamin's sister and her former charge. Catherine, dressed in her best gown and wrapped in a blanket Bethany had lovingly made, slept peacefully in her mother's arms, oblivious to the tension filling the room. Cade kept a protective arm around Bethany's shoulders as they took their seats, feeling the eyes of the Ellis family on them like a physical weight. The judge, an older man named Caldwell with graying hair and a stern expression, entered the courtroom. After the formalities of opening the case, the Ellis family's lawyer presented their argument, first a polished performance about the advantages the Ellis family could provide for the child, the importance of maintaining her connection to her father's legacy, and insinuations about Bethany's unstable behavior in fleeing with the infant. When it was their turn, Mr. Harmon approached the matter differently, focusing on the human aspects rather than legal technicalities. "Your Honor," he began, "we have before us a simple question. What is in the best interest of Catherine Ellis Kavanagh? Is it to be separated from the mother who has nurtured her since birth, who fled not out of instability, but out of the most primal maternal instinct to protect her child? Is it to be removed from the loving home she knows, with a stepfather who has embraced her as his own, to be raised by grandparents who, while wealthy, have demonstrated a willingness to use that wealth as a weapon?" He presented the testimonials from Dr. Morgan, Pastor Williams, and the Thompsons, all attesting to Bethany's excellent care of Catherine and the stable, loving home she and Cade provided. Sheriff Drake had made the journey to testify in person, his straightforward manner and obvious integrity making a strong impression. Then came the most difficult part. Bethany was called to testify. Cade took Catherine, who had woken and was quietly alert, watching the proceedings with wide blue eyes. Bethany approached the stand, her back straight despite her obvious nerves. Under Mr. Harmon's gentle questioning, she recounted her marriage to Benjamin, his death, and the subsequent pressure from his family to surrender her unborn child. "They made it clear that they would take Catherine by any means necessary," she testified. "I had no resources to fight them legally, no family to turn to. So yes, I fled. Not to deprive Catherine of her heritage, but to ensure she would know her mother's love." When the Ellis's lawyer cross-examined her, his approach was aggressive, designed to make her appear selfish and unstable. "Is it not true, Mrs. Kavanagh, or should I say Mrs. Ellis, as your hasty remarriage may not be legally valid, that you denied your in-laws even the opportunity to see their grandchild? That you disappeared without a word?" Bethany remained composed, though Cade could see the effort it cost her. "I wrote to them after Catherine was born," she replied. "I sent a letter with her birth date and assurance that she was healthy. I received no response except renewed efforts to locate us." "And you entered into marriage with Mr. Kavanagh how long after arriving at his property?" "Approximately 2 months," Bethany answered. 2 months. the lawyer repeated with exaggerated disbelief. Rather convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Just long enough to establish a case for a stable home, but hasty enough to secure legal protection before the child's birth. Mr. Harmon objected to the characterization, and the judge sustained it, but the implication had been made. When Bethany was finally allowed to return to her seat, her hands were trembling. Cade took one in his, squeezing gently in silent support. Next, he was called to testify. Handing Catherine back to Bethany, he took the stand, determined to speak plainly and from the heart. "Mr. Kavanagh," the Ellis's lawyer began, "what prompted you to marry a pregnant widow you had known for mere weeks? Was it perhaps the substantial property owned by her late husband's family, to which her child might have a claim?" Cade met the man's gaze steadily. "I married Bethany because I came to care for her deeply, and because I believed she and her child deserved protection from those who would separate them. I have my own land, my own home. I have no interest in Ellis property or wealth. And yet you filed for adoption of the child, a child with potentially significant inheritance." "I filed for adoption because I love Catherine as my own," Cade replied simply. "From the moment I held her, I knew she was my daughter in every way that matters. Blood is the least of what makes a family, sir." His honest emotion seemed to reach even the stern judge, whose expression softened slightly. After Cade's testimony, Harold Ellis took the stand. He presented himself as a grieving father who had lost his only son, and now wished only to ensure his grandchild was raised with the advantages Benjamin would have wanted for her. He portrayed Bethany as a confused young woman who, while perhaps well-meaning, lacked the resources and stability to provide properly for an Ellis heir. "We offered financial support," he claimed. "We asked only to be part of the child's life, to help raise her with the education and opportunities befitting her station. My son would have wanted his child to know her heritage." As the testimony continued, Catherine began to fuss in Bethany's arms. Despite her efforts to quiet the baby, Catherine's cries grew louder, disrupting the proceedings. Instinctively, Cade reached for her. "May I?" he whispered to Bethany, who nodded gratefully. Taking Catherine, Cade stood and began to walk slowly at the back of the courtroom, patting her back and murmuring soothingly. To everyone's surprise, she quieted almost immediately, her tiny hand grasping his shirt as she settled against his shoulder with complete trust. The simple, natural act spoke volumes more than any testimony could have. Here was clear evidence of a bond between Cade and Catherine that went beyond legal definitions or blood relation. He was, in every meaningful way, her father. Judge Caldwell watched the interaction thoughtfully. When the final arguments had been presented, he announced that he would consider the matter overnight and deliver his decision the following morning. That night, in their modest hotel room, Cade and Bethany took turns holding Catherine, neither willing to put her down as if their physical connection might somehow influence the judge's decision. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Cade said as they lay together, Catherine sleeping between them, "know that I will never stop fighting for our family. If the ruling goes against us, we'll appeal. We'll find another way." Bethany reached across their daughter to take his hand. "I know," she whispered, "and that knowledge gives me strength." The following morning they returned to the courtroom, where the Ellis family was already seated, looking confident. Judge Caldwell entered, his expression inscrutable as he took his place and called the court to order. "I have considered this matter carefully," he began. "Cases involving the welfare of a child are never simple, and this one presents particular complexities. On one side, we have grandparents of means and standing, seeking to provide what they believe is best for their grandchild. On the other, a mother who has demonstrated commitment to her child's well-being, and a stepfather who has embraced the child as his own. He paused, looking directly at each party. The law recognizes the importance of blood relation, but it also acknowledges the fundamental bond between mother and child. It recognizes financial advantages, but also the immeasurable value of love and stability. Cade held his breath, his arm tight around Bethany's shoulders. Having weighed all testimony and evidence, the judge continued, I find that the best interest of the child is served by remaining in the primary custody of her mother, Bethany Ellis Cavanaugh, and her stepfather, Cade Cavanaugh. Relief flooded through Cade so intensely that for a moment he couldn't hear the judge's next words. Beside him, Bethany was quietly weeping, clutching Catherine to her heart. However, Judge Caldwell added, bringing Cade's attention sharply back, I also find that the child's connection to her paternal heritage is significant. Therefore, I am ordering visitation rights for the Ellis family specifically. 2 weeks each year to be spent at their home in San Francisco when the child reaches the age of 5. Until then, quarterly visits of 2 days' duration to take place either at the Ellis residence or at a mutually agreed-upon location. The Ellis family's expressions were a mixture of shock and anger at the primary ruling, tempered somewhat by the granted visitation. Harold Ellis appeared ready to protest, but his lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm, apparently counseling acceptance. This court retains jurisdiction in this matter, the judge concluded. Any violation of this order by either party will be viewed most seriously. Court is adjourned. As they left the courtroom, Cade and Bethany holding tightly to each other with Catherine secure between them, Mr. Harmon offered his congratulations. A good outcome, he said with satisfaction. The visitation is a small concession to maintain the more important victory. Catherine remains with you. Thank you, Cade said sincerely, shaking the lawyer's hand, for everything. Outside the courthouse, they were confronted by the Ellis family one last time. Harold approached, his wife and daughter slightly behind him. This isn't over, he said coldly. She is still an Ellis. She's a Cavanaugh now, Cade replied firmly. And yes, it is over, at least the fighting should be. Catherine deserves to know all her family, including her grandparents, but on terms that respect her mother's place in her life. Victoria Ellis stepped forward, her gaze fixed not on Cade or Bethany but on Catherine, who was watching the strangers with curious eyes from her mother's arms. She has Benjamin's chin, Victoria said softly, an unexpected vulnerability in her voice. His eyes too, I think, though the color is different. Bethany, showing remarkable grace, turned slightly so Victoria could see Catherine better. She does, she agreed, and his determination. She never gives up when she wants something. A ghost of a smile touched Victoria's lips. Benjamin was like that from the time he could crawl. For a brief moment, the two women shared a connection through their mutual love for the man they had both lost. Harold, watching the exchange, seemed to come to some internal decision. The judge has ruled, he said stiffly. We will abide by his terms for now. We expect you to honor the visitation schedule. We will, Cade assured him. Catherine should know her father's family. With a curt nod, Harold led his wife and daughter away. Cade and Bethany watched them go, both sensing that while the legal battle was over, the emotional complexities of their family situation would continue for years to come. Let's go home, Bethany said, turning to Cade with love in her eyes. All of us together. The journey back to their ranch near Sacramento felt lighter somehow, despite the physical exhaustion of traveling with an infant. They had won the right to be a family, to raise Catherine in the home they had created together. The required visits to the Ellis family were a small price to pay for that victory. As they approached the ranch in the hired wagon that had brought them from the riverboat landing, Cade felt a surge of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. Their modest house had never looked more beautiful, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, a home in the truest sense of the word. "Welcome home, Catherine," he murmured to his daughter, who was wide awake in his arms, seemingly taking in the familiar surroundings. "This is where you belong." Bethany, seated beside him, leaned her head against his shoulder. "This is where we all belong," she corrected gently. "Together." The months that followed were the happiest of Cade's life. Free from the shadow of the Ellis family's threat, they settled into the rhythm of life as a true family. Catherine grew and thrived, beginning to crawl, then pull herself up to stand, her personality emerging more clearly each day, determined like her father Benjamin, compassionate like her mother, and with a streak of quiet strength that Cade liked to think might have come from his influence. The first Ellis family visit came when Catherine was 8 months old. Contrary to expectations, it went surprisingly well. Away from the courtroom and legal battles, even Harold Ellis seemed to soften somewhat in the presence of his granddaughter. Victoria brought gifts and stories about Benjamin as a child, building bridges through shared memories that helped Bethany maintain her own connection to her first husband, even as her love for Cade deepened. By Catherine's first birthday, celebrated with a small gathering of friends and neighbors at the ranch, Bethany was expecting their second child conceived in love rather than obligation, a sibling for Catherine and a further binding of their family. When Thomas Benjamin Kavanagh was born in early spring, with his father's dark hair and his mother's gentle temperament, the circle seemed complete. The ranch prospered, the family grew in love and understanding, and the past, while not forgotten, no longer cast a shadow over their future. On warm evenings, Cade often found himself sitting on the porch, watching Bethany rock baby Thomas while Catherine played nearby, her laughter carrying on the breeze. In these moments, he would remember that stormy night years ago when he discovered a frightened pregnant stranger hiding in his barn hay. How could he have known then that, in offering her his coat and keeping watch, he was finding not just someone to protect, but his heart's home? That the simple act of kindness would lead to this rich, full life he now cherished. "What are you thinking about?" Bethany would sometimes ask, catching his thoughtful expression, and Cade would smile, reaching out to take her hand. "About how sometimes the best journeys start on the darkest nights," he would reply, "and how finding you in that barn was the beginning of everything good in my life." It was true. From those uncertain beginnings, a pregnant stranger, a protective cowboy, a baby yet to be born, they had built something beautiful and enduring. A family bonded not by obligation or circumstance, but by the deepest, truest love. And in the end, that was all that mattered.